if you are watching TV at all in the 2020-2021 television season, you've likely heard the music of my guest, Matt Quayle. He's an Emmy-winning composer whose work can be heard on everything from Pose to the 911 franchise, to The Vow, to Ratched. I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby. And Mac, I guess my first question is, how are you able to do all of that at one time? Is it a difficult juggling act for you?
Well, I met this crazy scientist who said he could clone me, and he had some technology that was not available to the general public, and it worked. And so there are actually 5 of me. The other ones are doing interviews with some of your competitors right now. It gets a little confusing because my family can never tell which one of me they're talking with. And but in all seriousness, well, the 911 franchise, I co-compose. I co-composed 911 with Todd Haberman and 911 Lone Star with Todd Haberman and Justin Burnett. And that, we're able to handle the workload there because we have a nice group of us. And then on the other shows, there's also, a team. I have a full-time assistant, and there's some additional composers that chip in and help. And so somehow with everyone pulling together, we get it across the finish line.
So, I mean, a lot of these shows, obviously, you've had a long kind of history with Ryan Murphy. What is it about his shows that you, as a composer, respond to?
Well, I mean, he's a great storyteller, and so at the heart of all the shows, there's a story that is compelling, that has a lot of emotion in it. And then he doesn't just tell the story, but then there's this flair, which I think, even though across all these genres of show, there's this Ryan Murphy flair that's in all of them. And I find that exciting, and it keeps me interested.
So let's talk about some of these in particular. One of the things that I respond to most is sometimes when you hear a score and it just feels so much a part of the story that's being told that it stands out and doesn't stand out in a way. Where does your process begin in terms of, do you start with a script? Do you start with a tone? Where do you begin your process?
Well, there is a kind of a famous composer saying that, like, when we're doing our job, that no one notices us. Because it is there as a tool for the filmmaker to help them tell their story. It's not necessarily supposed to call attention to itself, probably like a lot of the elements of the filmmaking process. But my process can start usually with a conversation before I even get a script. It's with Ryan's team about what's coming. What is this story going to be? What is the setting? What is an idea of the mood? That conversation then will inform how I read the script. As I'm reading it, I'm imagining what they've told me about, their ideas of the world they want to create. And I might start writing some music after reading the script, or I may wait until they start shooting and they send me something to look at, and I'll start writing at that point. And once I do sit down to write, all of these things are informing it: the script, the conversations with Ryan and his team, and I'll write the first pieces of music based on all of that, and send it in. And now that's the big moment to see if have I taken a step in the right direction into the world that they're envisioning. And I will then get feedback on, yes, more, keep going in that direction, or it's almost, but you need to kind of just turn it a little bit this way. And occasionally it's, no, just go back out and go in another door.
Am I correct in the score in Ratched? Do I hear elements of like Philip Glass and things like that? Am I hearing correctly there?
Well, I mean, the touchstone for that score was really more like Bernard Herrmann
Mm.
and Elmer Bernstein. We were going for a sort of a vintage orchestral sound that would, hopefully speak to the period. That story takes place in, I believe, 1946, and so Ryan wanted to have a vintage orchestral sound for it.
And to contrast that with something, say, like Pose, which I think, certainly the music plays such a huge part of that culture. So when you look at a period piece, are period pieces easier? Are they more difficult? What kind of challenge do those kind of period pieces provide?
Well, I'm not sure that well, for me, just what my background and what my skill set has been historically, period pieces, the first one I did was Feud, Betty and Joan, was difficult. It was not in my wheelhouse. That show as well was a vintage orchestral score, and it's not something I had done before. So it was quite challenging. And when Ratched came up, it was a little less challenging because it wasn't my first time, but still challenging, not like in the center of my wheelhouse. But with something like Pose, the story started in the late 80s in New York, and the idea was to do a retro synth score, which is more in my wheelhouse originally. And so that's what I did. I broke out like my old analog synthesizers and created this sound for the show that was rooted in like 80s synth scores. So in that case, it actually turned out to be very comfortable for me to do.
And one of the things about Pose is, this third season, kind of jumps forward into the early to mid 90s. What was it like for you to go with that evolution of the time period? Did that change? I have to imagine that had to change some of what you did with the score.
Well, we did discuss that, and the second season went forward a little bit into time as well, and the third season even more. And the producers, they really love the sound of the score, so they said they didn't really want to, like each season, let's update the time period of the score. They did that with the source music, with the music that was played in the balls and different things. That was very much of the time when the story was taking place. But for the score, we kept it rooted in the kind of 80s sound, except here and there, just a touch of something that might have been happening in the 90s or whenever the story was taking place, what particular episode. But what was kind of fun for me in this last season is that my career started in New York in the music business. I was making dance music starting in the 90s in New York. And one of the features of Pose are these balls, these big scenes where these different houses are competing and dancing in costumes. And so there's a ball in the third season where they actually used a dance song that I worked on when I was then in that part of my career back in New York. So it was kind of fun when that showed up, and I hit play, and I was like, oh, there we go. My former self has made an appearance into Pose.
I have to imagine that when you take something like that and then you contrast it with, say, something like The Vow, which has a completely different feeling, it's a completely different genre. Does your approach then change in terms of how you go at it, or do you treat it pretty similarly?
The approach, it's actually very similar for me across all the projects. I mean, because the role of music for the most part stays the same. It's a tool for the filmmaker to tell the story. And so it really depends on the filmmaker and how they want to tell their story and how they're going to use music. But my job is still kind of the same. I'm writing music to help them tell the story, to help push an emotion, depending on what part of the story or what emotion they want to emphasize. So yes, musically, The Vow, very different from Pose, from Ratched, but still the filmmakers want to tell this story, and they want the music to help them to help the viewer feel an emotion.
What about instrumentation? One of the things that I find so unique when I talk to composers is that they have this very clear sense of not just, the song or the melody, but there's instrumentation there that I think technology helps with nowadays. Do certain projects set off an instrument in your head that you go, ooh, this would sound perfect here? Like I'm thinking of like the strings, the use of the strings in Ratched, which, with the Bernard Herrmann thing seems to be a perfect fit.
Yes. I mean, we knew strings would be a big part of Ratched once the early discussions about the retro orchestral sound were happening. We knew that would be, it wouldn't just be, it would be strings and brass and woodwinds, piano as well, was very, very traditional classic instruments for Ratched. That was kind of a no-brainer. It just, those instruments almost, in a way, almost like chose themselves for that. We knew that's what it would be. With something like The Vow, it's not as obvious as to what the instruments would be. The filmmakers wanted something. They did want something electronic, but not purely electronic. They did want to have some organic elements. And what would those be? I mean, the piano works so well in a cinematic context. It just, the piano really worked well for The Vow, nestled in with other electronics. We used some acoustic guitar, we used a little bit of strings, and that, in the beginning of the process, it wasn't really clear as to which instruments. It kind of developed over time as we started writing different pieces for, to tell this part of the story and that part of the story. It said, oh, well, we're going to need a piano for this part, and we're going to need strings for that. And it kind of evolved over the first couple of episodes.
In talking to other composers, one of the things that I always like to touch on is the use of technology in this sort of medium. Some see it as some prefer the old-fashioned way, and some prefer, to use Pro Tools and things like that. Where do you come down in that discussion?
I mean, yes, I've been using technology pretty much my whole career, from the aforementioned days in the music business in New York. I've been using computers and synthesizers and electronics. So it is the core tool for me. But I love human players. I love musicians. So some scores I'll get to use a lot of different players that are adding to the electronics, and some scores are pretty much me and my computer. It really just depends on the project.
How do you know when something you composed? How do you know when you've hit it? Is it a feeling? Is it just feedback from the creative team, or do you have a sense when you know you've gotten it?
I'd say more times than not, I do have that sense. I feel like I've hit it. I'm searching for something, especially in the beginning of a project, when there's a lot of experimentation and you're trying to discover the path into the musical world of the project. And so I'll hit on something, and I'll think this feels good. I think I've got it. And for me, part of my process is letting it sit. So I will go on to something else. And if there's time, then I leave it for a day. I'll come back the next day, and that first listen, fresh ears, is going to really tell me a lot. And if the first listen, it sounds great and I feel good about it, then I feel like this is it. maybe I'll develop it further and then send it in. If the first listen is like, not so sure, then maybe I didn't get it. And with these long running relationships, like with Ryan Murphy, I've come to it's not only that I feel like I've hit it, but I feel like I've hit what they're gonna want. And it's by no means a perfect system that I know for sure, because I could find something I think is great and I send it in and they're like, but more times than not, they resonate with it. They like it. And it might not be perfect and they'll ask me to change it, but they like the general gist of what I've created.
Well, like I said, if you're watching TV, chances are you have encountered Mac Quayle's work. Mac, thank you so much. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for more interviews throughout the season. Mac, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.